Welcome into the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennis. It's a Thursday, and we got a treat for you guys today. We're talking Sasquatch today, folks, and we're talking about a brand new movie that is out right now that you're going to want to check out. It's called A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. And we're going to talk with our guest here in a moment, the filmmakers of this film. But first, we want to play the trailer for you and give you a little taste of what you're in store for. Here it is.
I've had these experiences that have really affected me. And I talk to grown men who will stand there and cry over what they've seen. They won't go back in the woods to hunt.
Everybody I've ever talked to, witnesses, it changes them somehow. Because you're seeing something that isn't supposed to be there.
I'm looking down there and there's like these three very dark, very large figures. It took less than a second for me to realize what I was looking at were not people at all.
There was a wildlife biologist that works here in Oregon that confided in me in a private conversation. He told me very plainly he knows that the Bigfoot are real. And he said the reason that things are the way they are is because the Bigfoot are too intelligent and elusive. There's lots of elusive animals, but not this intelligent. He says you can't count them, you can't track them, you can't find them. There's a family of Bigfoot that has lived for years at the county dump. When the lights go out and the gate is locked and there's no one there at the dump, the Bigfoot come in every night and there's a smorgasbord there because they're the only animals that can get into the pit and back out.
If you want to ignore the thousands of reports that are out there, you can do that. But does that mean everybody's lying? Everybody's misconceived? Everybody's screwed up? What does that mean about all these people that are saying this all over the world, all over the United States, all over the Pacific Northwest now? People are saying they see these things. Open up your minds because they're out there.
A lot of people cannot handle that psychologically, mentally, or emotionally because it challenges everything that they've been taught. And the belief system of the human is actually very, very rock solid if a human only wants to believe one sliver of reality.
Stuff was just starting to happen, just the paranormal stuff. Then the Bigfoot stuff just went nuts.
You know, I kind of pulled Daryl aside and I said, listen, this may get weird really quick. Just so you know, I'm okay with that. I think that's supposed to happen.
I saw the thing take off running, and it doesn't run like a man or an animal, really. It's hard to explain because it's so fast, but it almost looks like it just skips a beat when it runs, and like airborne, so fast. I can't explain it, it's just gone.
There's a stone that he actually gave me in the shape of his foot, actually, which is kind of cool.
It can drive you mad. I mean, you're experiencing things that a psychotic person experiences. Voices in your head and things that aren't there. These things can drive a person crazy.
Being one of the fortunate few to have actually witnessed these amazing creatures, I assure you they are out there, and who knows what else might be out there.
You run into them and you get this flash of beauty and they are gone.
And that is the name of the movie, Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. Tobe Johnson and Brett Eichenberger are our guests. Tobe Johnson is the author of the Owl Moon Lab books and researcher of all things related to Bigfoot. With over a decade of research and his own experiences, he has dedicated his work to investigating the relationship of Sasquatch and the paranormal. Tobe is the co-producer of the documentary, Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, a groundbreaking two-part documentary series that focuses on Sasquatch witness testimony. Tobe has come to the conclusion that Sasquatch is not only very real, but is far beyond what most would have you to believe. Brett Eichenberger is an award-winning filmmaker with over 25 years of experience working in the film and video production industry. His work includes the feature films Light of Mine and Pretty Broken, commercial short films, music videos, and documentary shorts as well. Filmmaking has taken Brett all around the world, but he feels most at home in the outdoors of the Pacific Northwest. As a native Oregonian, Brett has been intrigued by Bigfoot since his childhood years, and this documentary has given him the opportunity to explore the topic in depth. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show, Tobe Johnson and Brett Eichenberger. Guys, welcome to Darkness Radio.
Thanks for having us, Tim. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Tobe, I know you're no stranger to this Bigfoot thing. Brett, is this, I know this isn't your first go-around, or is it your first go-around with Bigfoot?
So it's my first film go-around with Bigfoot.
Okay.
I've been getting to know some prominent folks in the Bigfoot community going back almost 10 years now. Actually, it will be 10 years this year. And my wife Jill and I, who is also the writer and producer, we found these guys through some friends of ours that we were working on a film with. They invited us to come out, and we ended up meeting Todd Neese, Peter Byrne, and Ron Moorhead. And we were like kids in a candy store, So we got to ask all these different questions, and we really felt at home with them. And so as the years went on, and we stuck to our narrative filmmaking roots, we kept coming back and saying, we got to do a Bigfoot documentary. We got to do. And there was a time about 5 or 6 years ago, we really thought that was the time to do it, but things didn't line up until the pandemic hit, and we realized that it was like, hey, no way to better social distance than to go out into the woods and do a Bigfoot doc. So that's kind of the story. That's how we got started.
Tobe, how do you come into this film, and how do you meet Brett?
Well, I come in pretty eagerly. I've been waiting, since the mid-2000s to meet filmmakers like this that could take on the subject matter through an interesting lens. And so I got a call, I think it was from Daryl Adams, who is the property owner of the Al Moon Lab. And he said there's some filmmakers that want to come down to the property and sit us on the back of a pickup truck and roll camera. It sounded like a good time. And so, pretty much from that first hour of meeting this production team, we could tell that they were the ones we wanted to tell the story. And so the story just kind of writes itself from there. That's the way Bigfoot is. It's filled with synchronicity, and all these people just kind of fall into place over this pandemic.
I got to ask you, Tobe, what is it about Brett and his filmmaking crew that kind of told you that they were the ones? I mean, there are a lot of Bigfoot documentaries out there, and there's got to be a different spin, of course, like you mentioned. But what is it what was it about his crew that said these guys are genuine and have a real passion to tell the story?
There was a bunch of little things for the fact that I'd seen some of their work they had online. There's this real patient quality with their camera lens. They're not looking for sensational, tracking Sasquatch tracks deep into the woods with FLIR cameras, although we've done that on our own. And I love doing that kind of stuff. We've seen a lot of that before in Bigfoot documentaries. But Brett and I were just talking about this the other day, and I'd forgotten the fact that I made a Sasquatch sculpture back in the mid-2000s for a pizza restaurant. And I named that Bigfoot, Big Ike. And Brett's, was it your father whose also name was Big Ike?
Yeah. My dad went by Big Ike.
Wow.
So, I mean, what are the chances that I would make a Bigfoot and the filmmaker's father is also named after the Bigfoot? Those kind of circumstances, if they were just one or two of them, one or two bits of synchronicity, I call that the tailored effect, and something tailor-made, a moment for us to kind of all hang out. That
is a synchronicity that kind of hits you right between the eyes, isn't it? That's very interesting. So, you guys get together and you're thinking, okay, we're on the same page here, but when do you sit down and start talking philosophy on Bigfoot and what you think Bigfoot really is? Are you on the same page there? And let's start with you, Brett. Do you share the same philosophy as Tobe and vice versa?
Yes, absolutely. And I don't think there was ever any really deep, I mean, there's been plenty of deep philosophical discussions during the production of the film, but I don't think there was ever like a moment where we kind of came together and said, yeah, we both agree on the same things. I think we showed up, the three of us. It was myself, Jill, and Mike Ferry, the cinematographer. We showed up to interview Tobe and Daryl, and we were sold already. We had previously seen them in the Bigfoot Alien Connection film, and we were blown away by what was happening. As far as Bigfoot having a paranormal, side to them, that did take a little bit of time for us to kind of get our mind into that framework, if you will. But that happened to us a few years ago. So when we came into this film, we expected the unexpected, if you will. However, we didn't expect so much unexpected. I think there was kind of a limit to our imagination, and we're constantly being surprised.
Tobe, what I'm going to ask you the same question. When you sit down with Brett and you're talking about what you think Bigfoot may or may not be, are you a little trepidatious? Do you come out and just say, this is what I think it is? And does it line up pretty much with what Brett is thinking too?
In the beginning, yeah. But that wears off quick when experiences start to metastasize and they start having experiences, sometimes with us, sometimes without us, not in the same spot, in different spots, different states. And that's where the synchronicity part plays in as well, over and over again. But, the movie's broken up into two parts. The first part is pretty much an introduction to what Bigfoot can do to a person, not necessarily the supernatural part at all. We save that for later, but the first part is, I guess it's more careful in explaining a baseline introduction to what an experiencer goes through.
Interesting. We'll get to that in a moment. I want to backtrack a little bit here, and then let's jump into that because that sounds fascinating. Brett, I want to go backwards to before the film, and I want to talk to you a little bit about, have you actually had an experience with what you believe Bigfoot is, and have you actually just had a one-on-one before even shooting the film with Bigfoot?
Unfortunately, I have not. But it kind of felt like Bigfoot was always ever present, growing up in Oregon, spending a lot of time in the mountains, in the forest, some of my earliest childhood memories are camping and being out in the forest. And, that goes back over 40 years. And my father kind of like pounding into me as a child that, Bigfoot's here, Bigfoot's there, Bigfoot's everywhere, and he's watching you, kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it was just ever present in my mind. And I speak for Jill too, when I say she had the same idea. Her home and where she grew up backed up to, timberland stretching for miles, hundreds of miles. And so we both kind of had this, that's one of the things that connected us so many years ago, was this idea of the paranormal and Bigfoot and things that, just make for great stories and great legends. So, no, after we started shooting the film is when we started having experiences. And we both Jill and I had other paranormal experiences that really opened our mind. So I feel like we were ready to go. We didn't go into this with a lot of skepticism.
Once you started having experiences out filming, do you look back on some of your camping adventures and go, you know what, that one thing I heard in the woods, or maybe that tree formation I saw when I was a kid, it could have been something that was related to Bigfoot? Did something ever happen like that, where something triggered a memory from childhood?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I was talking to, one of my best friends that I've known since the first grade, and he and his parents and I went hiking and camping up in the North Cascades National Park when we were 13 years old, in the 8th grade. And he reminded me of some really, really strange sounds, some strange howls that we had heard on that hike, and we're probably 6-7 miles out in the middle of nowhere. And I'd completely forgotten about that because, back then you don't have a context for Bigfoot. You try and rationalize it. You think that it's something else entirely. So that sticks out in my mind. I mean, there's another instance that comes back to, Jill and I were driving through the Coast Range late at night after visiting her parents. It was probably midnight, maybe even later. And we had an incident along the road where something big came flying out of the woods and hit the right fender of our car. And I thought for sure it was a wild animal or whatever. But beyond that, I knew that there was damage to the car. And it was dark. It was rainy. It was a dark and stormy night. And it was dangerous for us to pull over and check the damage. And so eventually when it became safe, we pulled over and I expected to see the fender bashed in and everything else. I mean, it was a really loud sound. There was nothing there. There was no mark, no nothing. And we, still to this day, we couldn't figure it out. I mean, it was something of paranormal origin or something. I mean, it's just odd, So, yeah, you definitely go back in your mind's eye and revisit these things and ask yourself, what was it? What could it have been? Could it be tied to Bigfoot? Is it? I think there's a lot of paranormal things in the woods, not just Bigfoot. So
yeah,
you wonder.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. So Tobe, you bring up that this movie is in 2 parts, and the first part is dealing with just not necessarily the supernatural effects of what happens when you have an encounter with Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but just the physical encounter or what happens. I'm not describing it correctly, I know, but just what happens in the initial phase. Walk me through it a little bit as to why 2 parts and why did you separate it in this way? Just walk me through it for a second as to why it happened this way.
Okay, and I'll invite Brett in on this as well, just based on what you said, Brett. And I agree is that there is so much footage that we didn't really want to get rid of anything. Brett didn't want to edit out all these amazing interviews. And so in order to keep them, there had to be a sequel or a trilogy of some kind. So, and plus, this is the real world of looking into, if you become a Bigfooter, it won't take you very long. We just got done with a conference, and it didn't take very long to the newbies that were putting on the conference that there are these 2 camps. And they're broken up between flesh and blood and this other category that says, no, it's much stranger, much, much stranger, and it's connected to all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. And, it just sounds so goofy to talk about Bigfoot in general. Most people think it's so juvenile what we're into. But then when you add the idea that there's something stranger going on, they just don't have any tolerance for it. In fact, at this conference, certain people just got up from their table and left and didn't watch the presenters go through the motions of talking about these stranger things. And so you have to have room for that. You have to allow for it and say, hey, not everybody's ready to take the red pill that Bigfoot can cloak. Let's just talk about them existing. Yeah. That's strange enough. And if that's the first layer, and there's all these other layers, and that first layer is what you want to watch, well, now you've got a beautiful film to do it with. But I'll let Brett finish that thought.
Yeah. So our first edit was close to 5 hours. And, we wanted to include the entire topic in one documentary. That was always the goal, the paranormal side and the aper side, if you will. In the Bigfoot community, they're called apers in the woo. And what happened is once we saw that 5 hour cut, we thought, all right, we can't really cut much because this is all really important stuff. So to be fair, we thought, well, we'll do a doc for the apers and we'll do a doc for the woo. And basically, that's what we're doing is we've got the second film about 80% shot, because a lot of it is going to be expanding on the interviews of eyewitnesses and some of the same people that we use in the first film. But we're also going to be shooting some new footage with some folks that we've met through the process who are extended experiencers. And we're also going to really expand on Tobe and Daryl's story and about their extended experiences at the Owl Moon Lab and how that all ties in, because their story is really kind of the gold standard, if you will, of extended experiences with, both the physical and the paranormal side of things. Mm-hmm. So in short, it was just really too big to cover in one film. And, I think Jill is even thinking about doing a third one. And that might be a possibility. But as of right now, we've got 2. And the next one, we're hoping to have out, in a little less than a year.
So I got to stop you guys real quick and ask this question, because as I sit here as a paranormal radio show host and producer, I can't wrap my head around the fact that there's 2 factions here. Because I have to take all things into consideration, as much as I want to be a skeptic. And a healthy skeptic will say, okay, well, prove it to me. If there is something out there that's supernatural, prove it to me. But at least you can prove it to me and I can change my mind. So you would think an aper would say, okay, well, if there is something, if they are passing through portals, at least prove it to me and I'll rethink my position. But to actually get up from a table or a seat and walk away because you don't want to hear anything of it is a little ridiculous, don't you think? I mean, that to me says that you've closed your mind on a subject that you don't really even know. I don't want to say you don't know exists, because there's something there. You're showing footage of something that physically exists.
The thing is, Tim, that using the word supernatural or woo or paranormal, when you attach it to something you can't explain or prove, it's almost as though you've provided a sort of Teflon. You don't have to explain it. You just throw it into this giant gray box that is the paranormal, and you have no responsibility over it. So I'm defending them to a degree because we have that responsibility. We can't just say it's magic. There are these unseen scientists, unseen scientific values, quantum entanglement, quantum Bigfoot theory, written by Ron Moorhead. And we're digging in to the strange new world. And so for us, it's, it's careful territory, because these are usually alpha males, right, that are having these alpha experiences, and they already feel outgunned by what's happening in the woods. Sure. Now, what do you do when you tell them they've got this, magic monkey that has this disappearing act? I've had them tell me straight to my face and say, if it is what you're telling me it is, I wouldn't do this anymore. And they've done it all their lives. They want to figure out what's going on with this scientific explanation. And in order to get to that point, to even talk about that, you have to bring them along that maybe Bigfoot's not about Bigfoot at all. Maybe it's more about how we respond to these sightings. And that's what this movie does. It's an emotional context to the witness that happens to have these Bigfoot encounters. And no one's ever done a movie like this where they lean into the witness experience. And so, talking to psychologists and hypnotherapists and, people that have calculated what's going on across the maps as far as sightings, these are all things that have rarely ever been talked about in the Bigfoot world. And, this film does it.
Well, now you do bring up something interesting that I want to touch on here in a second, but the one thing that I guess I could only counter an aper with is anybody who's ever grabbed a hair sample and tried to have it tested never comes up with anything that says it's a monkey. It's always come back as something other than nothing ape-like. So to try and combat with science seems kind of absurd in itself, doesn't it?
I don't know, Brett, I'm going to let you take that one because I can't defend them all day. For me, it's very tough to defend sometimes.
I completely agree with you, Tim, and we're on the same page. And it occurred to us pretty early on that we're going to have to bring science into this conversation, because it's all science based, and the way we feel is that we're talking about science that may not have been discovered yet, at least and or disclosed in a public forum. Mm-hmm. Because we're talking about people who are very credible people who have gone through trauma, believe it or not, when they've witnessed Bigfoot, disappearing. We've had people that have watched them walk into trees, physically walk into trees. We have people that have seen orbs and strange lights. They can actually manifest sounds. Ron Moorhead talks about that. He was listening to his camp destroyed, and when he walked outside, in the middle of the night, nothing had been touched. So this paranormal realm is vast, but there is a science aspect to it. And, and Ron Moorhead in his book, The Quantum Bigfoot, really starts getting into the quantum mechanics of it. And quantum mechanics is still a relatively new science, but it's starting to kind of explain how a lot of these things could be possible because of the different dimensions, the different frequencies. And these scientists, these quantum mechanics, explain how some of the stuff could work and how they can change their vibrational frequency, so on and so forth. So I don't know if the apers out there are just afraid. I don't know if they're afraid of the ridicule, if they're afraid of this whole new and strange universe. We're not quite sure what it is, but we think it's important to try and find out what it is.
I tell you what, let's take our break early. When we come back, I want to dip into this emotional side of things. Like you pointed out, I believe it was Tobe who pointed out that this movie really tackles things from an experiencer side and the emotional side of the experiencer, because there is trauma involved. And I want to explore the psychological side of trauma. And are we seeing what we believe we see? Because sometimes in the middle of trauma, there's reality, and then there's what we think we see and what we may not be seeing. So I want to go down that rabbit hole with you guys here in just a moment. Our guests are Tobe Johnson and Brett Eichenberger. The film is fascinating, folks. Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed is the name of the film. And we have a link to the website in the description of this program where you can actually get the film, where you can go watch the film right now. BigfootDoc.com is the website, but we have that link here in the description of this program, so you can go ahead and click on that and go watch the movie by all means. Fascinating stuff. When we come back, we'll talk about trauma and the trauma of Bigfoot victims, and about the psychological trauma, and is what we're seeing in that traumatic moment with Bigfoot actually what we're seeing? We'll tackle that when we come back on the Best in Paranormal Talk Radio. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennis. We're talking Bigfoot today, and we're talking about the documentary Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. Our guests are Tobe Johnson and Brett Eichenberger, the filmmakers of this movie. Guys, before the break, I teased that we were going to talk about one of the main things of the movie, or one of the main themes of the movie, and that is the trauma behind some of the experiencers of Bigfoot. And a lot of psychologists will tell you when it comes to trauma, there are certain memories that are kept in trauma, and there are certain memories that are lost in trauma. And there are certain things that are seen in trauma that might not have happened, or might have been exaggerated, or a person who goes through trauma might go into themselves and may not remember things correctly when they when they go into trauma because of just that. Their brain has been traumatized to the point where it's just that it has to protect itself. So I would ask you this, and I guess I'm coming at it from a devil's advocate point of view. When you're talking to the different people who've had experiences with Bigfoot, are you taking it, and don't get me wrong here, are you taking it with a grain of salt? Are you taking it open-endedly, the stories that you're getting? How are you taking the experiences that you're getting from these people?
If I could jump in here, I think that throughout this entire process, we have always questioned everything, and you have to. Mm-hmm. And with that being said, what we have a little bit of an advantage because we've come from the narrative filmmaking world, and we've been honored to work with some really fantastic actors. And over time, as you study acting and you study performance, you can kind of, get a really good idea of when somebody's lying, when somebody's being deceitful, and when somebody's telling the truth. And part of that reason is just because if you're not a good actor, it's the performance is called wooden. In other words, you just don't get any emotion from that individual, from that actor. And so when we sat down and we started interviewing some folks that had these sightings and these experiences, we were getting them close to tears. And that's really tough for someone to do and someone to get to if they're not seeing those visions in their mind, if they're not reliving that experience. Now, I agree that it may not always have been Bigfoot, but whatever it was scared them so much that they don't want to go back into the woods again. And we're talking about some pretty tough folks, people who've grown up in the woods. One gentleman named Mark Parker had been hunting since he was the age of 13. And, he pretty steadfastly says into the camera in our film, "I know what I saw, and it wasn't a bear." And what we left out of that interview is he was frozen more or less for about 5 minutes. And when he finally got back to his truck, mind you, he's got guns on him that he's too afraid to use. When he gets back into the truck, he'd realized that he had wet himself because he was so scared.
Wow.
And this is a guy that's literally, he talks about this in the film. He's seen every animal there is to see in the woods. So he saw something. So that, that to me was convincing. I mean, he was actually very reluctant to go on camera. We have seen grown men cry. We have people we spoke to people who wouldn't go on camera and saw something extraordinary. So there is that trauma there. And you're exactly right. A lot of these folks, in a protective mechanism, will subdue that fear. They'll push it down. They'll rationalize it. Chad and Austin, who are featured in the film, had a joint sighting, and in the days and weeks that followed, they'd randomly call each other up and say, "We did see that. We did see that, right? We did." And again, those are two guys that are very comfortable in the forest. One of them was an Iraqi veteran, and he was more afraid after the Bigfoot sighting than he was at any time during combat. It's huge. So for me, I feel like that's some of the absolute best evidence we have are these Class A eyewitnesses and that emotional journey, because these people know what they saw. They had plenty of time to see it. These weren't just quick sightings.
Now, Brett, is the trauma coming from a negative experience with Bigfoot, or is it just the fact that this thing that they've never seen before is standing in front of them and they don't know what to think?
Most of these experiences are not negative. I think the negative side of things is just instinctual. It's seeing something that is A, should not exist, and B, is just really hard to comprehend as far as size is concerned. And when people really kind of get a good idea of something that's 8 feet to 9 to 10 feet tall, it's just imposing. It's imposing to be around a person that's that tall. Mm-hmm. So when you're around something that's that tall with the muscular build that these things have and the extremely long arms that these things have, I mean, you get into this flight or, this fight or flight, mindset where I think instinctively you're thinking this is something that could snap me like a toothpick, and you have no idea what its intentions are. So you can turn it into a negative situation, but that's not always the case. Some people were far enough away that, like Daryl, who's at the end of our film, he was far enough away that it was a very positive experience for him. And in fact, it may have even have saved his life. Mm-hmm. So there's varying degrees of these sightings, but one thing is for sure, nobody is ever the same person after seeing something like this.
Yeah, and just to bounce off that, the trauma of having your worldview flipped upside down from, let's say you had a sighting when you're 45 years old, and your worldview, came from your folks and your grandparents and your church and your government, and everything comes crashing down all at once in 5 seconds of a roadside crossing. You see that time and time again, where just 5 seconds of having that worldview flipped over from something very benign, but because it's so counter narrative to what we've all been told, nothing makes sense anymore. You have gone into the matrix temporarily and been flushed back in to the supposed real world. And you hear that from once Deputy Sheriff Rich Germeau, who is was a local police officer out here in La Push, Washington. And he has a powerful testimony of having, his life basically rewritten from these short little bursts as a cop seeing Sasquatch and finding out that nothing really is as it seems.
Tobe, I have to ask you, especially after talking to these different people, there's got to be you guys are going to kind of roll your eyes at me here. There's got to be a little bit of a crazy complex here with different people. And when I say crazy complex, this is what I mean. You don't want to talk to people about it because you're going to get people saying, "Oh, you're crazy. There's no such thing." So you live with it. You sit with it and you live with it. But then there's the people close to you that can hold the secret. So maybe you talk to those people. Yet you let it stew and it sits over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And then you question yourself. When you're sitting and you're talking with these people, do you find that it's a relief? Do you get a lot of relief from these people that you're talking about, these experiencers, that they're finally able to talk to you? Or do you get a lot of skepticism from them? Like, how are you going to handle my story? How are you going to keep my legacy here? What is it that you get from them? Do you get a mix of an array of emotions from them?
Yeah, there's an array. Most Bigfooters who are really into this and all their friends are Bigfooters and that's all they kind of do outside of their family or work is Bigfoot. Look for Bigfoot, feel Bigfoot, watch Bigfoot shows. They just want to tell their story over and over again. It's like a cathartic exercise that can go on for several hours. And Brett and I have had to, live that out in my case since the mid-2000s. And Brett now, he's probably heard more than I have in the last 2.5 years. So you have to have a certain sense of patience, but you have to take some time out for yourself too, because it's very exhausting to go to conferences and sit there and hear, countless Sasquatch stories for almost 14 hours straight. And you're living and breathing. It's like going into a sweat lodge of Bigfoot, and there's no exit near enough. And, I'm one of those people. So when I talk about this, and you ask that question, Tim, I wonder if you stole my diary because there's so much of me in that question. Mm-hmm. And, so for your question overall is that, yes,
there's a little bit of both, and you have to have patience for both.
I just, I see there's a bit of vulnerability in there. There's a bit of, like you said, fatigue. There can be some fatigue there because you do want to get it out. But at the same time, how much is too much? Well,
and this is PTSD, Tim. I mean, this is a solid case for people that have post-traumatic stress disorder, just like someone who got back from combat. It's the same thing. You could have died. You almost died, perhaps. And you cannot even tell your wife. You cannot tell your pastor. You can't even tell a psychologist. I mean, unless you find one of the guys that we put in the film, they're going to put you in the category of someone who needs medicated. And that's what they do. They self-medicate through drugs and alcohol or extreme behavior. Suddenly, go on these tangents of quitting all the safety things in life, like their job, their family, and only pursue the deep, dark woods. This is a thing that happens. There's a high divorce rate, alcoholism, and, abuse of things that should be viewed as a hobby. So, it's a serious thing on one hand. However, it is such a beautiful thing that I try to push those types of people aside and only pursue this beautiful mystery, with loved ones or myself.
So let me ask you this then, Tobe. I'm sorry, Brett. Let me follow this up real quick, and then we'll get to what you're going to say there, Brett. So let me ask you this then, Tobe. So you get the people who get obsessed and want to keep going back over and over and over again. What is it you think you're going to find if you run into Sasquatch again?
Oh, so there's a adreno dump that you cannot compare to anything. It would be tantamount to having a God experience, probably a near-death experience or a massive CE4 UFO abduction experience. And you are in contact with something so otherworldly, it cannot just be a missing link. The humanness quality to it all, on top of all of what can only be described as some kind of transitional demigod magic with the Sasquatches. You hear about it all the time. So once you have that adreno dump once, it's all you can think about, because perhaps you can get a step closer and a step closer. And before you know it, you're spending 30 years chasing shadows. And that's kind of the Bigfoot curse.
Is there a pheromone that Bigfoot gives off when you're near it by chance that does give off something that whether it be fear or whether it does give off a feeling of elation or something that you could tell?
I was just thinking of a new line for Flash of Beauty, Brett. You could come out with a cologne or a perfume, the Sasquatch pheromone, Flash of Beauty.
I like
it. Yeah, you go ahead.
Go ahead, Brett. I'm sorry. What were you saying?
So I think it's quite the opposite, unless, we've missed the fact that there's some sort of a pheromone. I mean, these things stink, and it's kind of our opinion that stench is a protective mechanism to get you to go away. One of the things that they do is they definitely send you a sense of doom, if you will, whether it's through infrasound or presence or whatever. And this gets into the paranormal side of things a little bit. People get mind speak, so on and so forth. But the stench, I've never smelled it. We've never smelled it, but it's supposedly somewhere in the area of skunk meets wet dog mixed with garbage, something like that. So I think it's a little opposite of
But that's not totally
Bigfoot.
Not totally on par with the research, in my experience, Brett. There's a wide variety of other smells that people attribute to female Sasquatch that would be tantamount to a seduction smell or a pheromone. Included in that is sweetgrass. Native Americans use sweetgrass and sage. Also lavender. I mean, lavender fields in the mountains is pretty rare in Doug fir country. Mint is another one. So I've heard those three smells in particular. Now, how do you attribute that? I don't know. Brett's right, though. The biggest common smell is dead flesh. And we have smelt that at the Al Moon Lab as recent as the last trip that we took there. It was the day before you got there, Brett, when Tara and I were sitting around the campfire. And it's an interesting smell because it comes in like a corpse, and it circles you almost like a wind, and then it leaves. And you know that there was no smell like that before. There's no roadkill nearby. There's not a whole lot of reason for it unless you can find maybe, the toilet's overflowing or something like that at camp. But yeah, it's one of those things that most Bigfooters will agree on, flesh or blood or not, is that there are these diverse smells. But mainly, yeah, what Brett's saying is an awful smell.
And understandable that that's there to drive away most, I don't want to say predators, but it's there to drive away most anything to get it to go away. But it seems to me that, and I get the adrenal kick, that it's there to that you see one of these creatures and you want to keep pursuing it because curiosity kills the cat, right? It's one of those things that we see something that we can't explain and we want to keep going at it until we know exactly what it is. Right. But at the same time, it seems like more so, I mean, put it this way, and I'll draw a parallel here. People who have experiences with a UFO seem to want to run from it. They don't want to keep going back into the woods. They don't want to keep going after spaceships, especially if they feel like they've been abducted, or they've had an implant, or the last thing they want to do is keep trying to find these gray aliens, or they want to keep trying to find these creatures to get an explanation. That's the last thing they want to do. Conversely, here we're talking about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and you have people wanting to give up everything to have another experience, because you do have people out there who, and I've talked to some of them, who believe Sasquatch is not just, I mean, you have two camps, right? You have the camp that believes that Sasquatch could turn on you in a minute and disembowel you, and you have another camp that believes that Sasquatch is this furry friend who lives one with nature, and everything is touchy feely, right?
I like that.
Yeah, and I think I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think they're just like people. I think you've got all kinds of different personalities. I think any number of Sasquatch could rip a person to shreds if they needed to protect their clan or their youth. Chad and Austin in our film, they saw an adult and a juvenile, and the adult Sasquatch pushed the juvenile behind him to shield him from, these two men standing on the other side of the lake watching them. So, they're gonna do what they've got to do to protect themselves. Yet at the same time, there's a curiosity and a need to communicate with humans. And that's been told to us many, many times. And Tobe and Daryl, that's a gigantic part of their story, and that's positive communication. So, and that's the beauty side of things. And that seems to be more about who these beings are is more of a well-rounded human than, something like you'd see in a horror movie going around destroying things and chasing campers and whatnot.
So do you believe as you're talking to some of these experiencers, is there a common thread as to why they're having these experiences? Are they going out looking to have an experience, or did it just so happen to be they happen to run into Bigfoot, or was it something that Bigfoot was looking for them for some reason?
You go ahead, Brett.
That's a great question. Chad and Austin, again, to come back to them, they said in their interview that, they were up there doing YouTube survival videos. Mm-hmm. And it was just two of them. In fact, Chad's wife dropped them off. They didn't even have a car to drive home. They wanted to just be out in the thick of it. And they had left their cameras up at the campsite, which was quite quite a ways away from where they were fishing and where they had their sighting. And they are both 100% convinced that they would not have had their sighting had their cameras been nearby. And that seems to be a pattern that, you know, it's as if they chose you to show themselves to you. You know, we've heard that from a number of different people. So, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, then you kind of get into what about the ones that run across the road and so on and so forth. Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. Maybe Tobe can elaborate on it a little bit.
You know, I write about in the book the God complex that comes over the human and that thinks they have the answer to Sasquatch because they feel chosen. And those people are really insufferable. I try not to hang out with them, but there's definitely a noted few for sure. And they feel so connected to the phenomena that you have to go to them to figure out the answers of Bigfoot. It sounds as bad as I'm describing. However, you know, getting into the possibility that Sasquatch has been able to elude us, as far as I know, without real discovery. Certainly, there's no displayed body on the top floor of the Smithsonian. How are they able to do that? And my working theory is that really unconventional is that they appreciate time differently. However, they're able to do that is beyond normal instinct. So, in the case of these two witnesses making a YouTube video, maybe it was perceived already that they weren't going to bring a camera. So a meeting was arranged of some kind. Less, controversial than that is perhaps they can sense so well the types of electronics that you have with you or read you so well by the time you get into the tree line that bringing in a camera is tantamount to having a sliver in your hand. You may not be able to see it, but you sure can feel it. And I think it's something in between that. Now, just fancy guessing on my part, maybe it's nothing like that at all. But just to be able to ask those kind of questions without, ridicule or tomatoes being thrown at you, that's really all we want, is just to be able to ask the questions without being shadow banned.
Well, why is it such a crime to ask questions like that? I mean, it seems to me that they're just questions.
Yeah, they're dangerous questions because they imply that you're looking into something beyond flesh and blood, and if you are, you're into witchcraft territory for a lot of these guys. That's just it. I mean, the reason they shut down Skinwalker Ranch, a lot of time, if you look into Bob Bigelow's reasons why, they're different than why the Pentagon wanted to shut it down, because they were looking into the devil's work that came out of George Knapp's mouth. So this is something that has been looked at before from the highest levels down. And, that's what, and plus funding would stop. If you're, this is all about prolonged funding. You're taking forever to find Bigfoot. Why? Well, you have an endless contract and money flow coming through as long as you don't find Bigfoot. And I'm not throwing shade at any of the guys from that. I'm talking about research in general. Mm-hmm. But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. You bring up a good point, and you bring up an interesting point. There's never been a body found, and I'm going to take it to a place where I know both of you guys are. You may not want to go, and that is, there's been some lawmakers, some legislators that have put out there things like Bigfoot hunting season, or have put out, wanting to make it legal to hunt a Bigfoot. I know that's not something that's in either of your guys' wheelhouse or something that you would agree to. So I pose the question to you, and again, this is only a devil's advocate thing. This is nothing I'd ever agree with at all. But if it is a creature that they can't prove exists, why wouldn't you tell a state, okay, well, why not put it out there? If it's out there, why can't we bring out just one body and see if we can prove it. Why can't we shoot it and at least say we've got one specimen to prove that it's there?
That's a tough question. And I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that we just don't know what these are. And, in my opinion, they're too close to human to be something that we can just kill, for research purposes. And, a lot of hunters that have been sitting up in blinds that have had perfect shots couldn't take the shot. And this is a story that's repeated over and over and over again. They were too scared to take the shot because it was too human-like. So while it is important to science, there's also the other component too, that if Bigfoot were discovered, say, here in Oregon, it would go through a long process of, is it endangered? Is there a population of them? Where is the population? And then all of a sudden, the logging industry comes to a halt. The recreation industry comes to a halt in that particular area because nobody wants to go out and confront a Bigfoot now that they know they're real. So it kind of opens a Pandora's box, and so, some of the folks that we've talked to talk about how the government knows about them. They do track them. And the government wants to keep them as a legend. It protects everybody, protects them, protects the public, protects economics. So, and I can buy into that. That makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of logic there. Yeah.
And you're right. There is a lot of logic there. I mean, it does shut down a lot. If you discover that, let's say, Bigfoot really is an ape and not a woo, then yeah, you're dealing with an indigenous species that you all of a sudden have to, and if it is endangered, then you do need to make some exceptions, and in multiple states. I mean, you're talking about anywhere from the southeast to the northwest to different areas. I know we have here in Minnesota, there's an area just north of me here that they see Bigfoot on a golf course of all places, which, to me would, all of a sudden you're shutting down a golf course, which you're going to, piss off a lot of rich people. There you go.
Yeah.
So, that does pose a lot of questions. Tobe, I got to ask you about this because I found it very intriguing. The Owl Moon Lab, A Paranormal Experiment, your book. It actually has kind of an interesting component to it, and that has to do with your media along with the book. Explain to people what the interesting twist to it is.
Sure, it's encoded. It's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. It's got a multi-tool device. It can do everything but jack up your car. It has QR codes embedded in the page. So, like I said, I've been doing this since the early mid 2000s. And I had my recorder and iPhone with me 24/7 on this property in the little town of Cottage Grove. So as events happened, as evidence was found and chronically, put in order for audio, video, and some of the papers we had written on the evidence we found, you can read along. And as you do, you go to the QR code with your smartphone and simply scan it with your camera, just like you do everything else now. And it opens up a video compilation for audio and video through the publisher. So you can relive the actual chapter in real time.
That is awesome. Again, we're going to put a link up for that book as well. So you can get the book and man, I'm telling you, that's an awesome addition to a book, because a lot of times, you're reading a book and you wish that you could get a look at what it is you're reading, or, you could kind of relive what it is that you're reading. But to have that visual or that audio or whatever it is that's there is just a cool twist. It really is.
Yeah. I was proud to, I didn't come up with the idea. I was proud to be a part of somebody else's brilliant idea. So yeah, we're excited about it.
But still, to put it out there, man, that's really cool. So yeah, we'll put a link up as well to the Owl Moon Lab, A Paranormal Experiment. And again, folks, you gotta pick up a copy of that and check that out, because that's really cool. So this is the first of 2 movies, and you said maybe a third. Is that how it may go down, Brett?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many compelling stories to tell. So, I mean, the mind is kind of wandering about, this, that, and the other thing. And I think that the paranormal side of things is a bit of a rabbit hole. Okay. We have a number of individuals that we've spoken with already who, we feel like might need that third film, because their stories are so incredible. And their stories kind of take place in the universe of Bigfoot. But they have a hard paranormal edge to them, but not necessarily a Bigfoot edge to them. They're taking place in areas that Bigfoot are known to habituate. So, and that we have multiple stories like that. So the question is how do we file those? Where do those go? I mean, it's pretty amazing, but for right now, we're going to stick to 2 films, and we'll just see what the future holds.
Most definitely. Well, A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed is out now. Again, we've got a link to the film in the description of the show. In this film, again, eyewitness accounts, evidence, lots of things that'll turn your head in this film alone. We encourage you to go watch that film, because again, the trailer, there's so much stuff just in the trailer. The one thing, and I got to bring this up before we leave people today, that one scene in the trailer that has to do with the dump is a little unnerving. I don't know why it's unnerving to me, but it is, because I got to tell you this. Recently I'm cleaning out my storage, and of course you take stuff to the dump, right? But to think that Sasquatch is hanging out in the dump, to me is just a little unnerving. But why the dump? What is it about the dump that Sasquatch is hanging out there? Because to me, when you think of a dump, you think, okay, it's all of our old stuff. I don't think that there's much food stuff there, but was it because there's old food stuff there?
That's the only conclusion that we can come to. And obviously we were out at the dump. I was flying a drone over it, and we were inspecting it. And what's interesting about that dump is it's way off the beaten path. So that's the abandoned town dump, I believe, or another smaller town nearby. And this isn't just like a dump in city limits. It's outside of city limits. It's surrounded by forest land that has a history of Bigfoot sightings. And so it makes sense. I mean, if it's easy pickings for food and I think there's some evidence that they like to collect knickknacks and oddities, as been shown through some of the gifting exchanges.
Yeah.
It's a great spot for them to hang out,
That's crazy. I just, that one little bit in the trailer about the dump, to me, it was just like, why the dump? Yeah, that in itself just caught my attention, and it's one of those things you get caught in your head and you can't get it out. It's amazing. But I encourage everybody to at least this weekend, take some time, sit down and watch this film, especially if Bigfoot is your passion. A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed is the name of the film. Again, there's a link to the film in the description of the show, or just go to bigfootdoc.com. Guys, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to getting another screening here of the film and taking a look at it again. Brett, Tobe, I want to thank you very much for joining us today on the show.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. And guys, I want to remind you again, take care of yourself and each other, and be good to each other. Be kind to each other. Again, the world is just seems to be getting a little rougher, a little harder out there, and people aren't being nice enough or kind enough to each other. I'm out for somebody in need this weekend, and just do a little something extra for somebody this weekend. It goes a long way. You never know how somebody's weekend is going, and they could really use your help this weekend. So just do a little something extra for somebody this weekend. Just do it for your buddy Tim. We got a great week of shows next week. Tune in next week for more in the best of paranormal podcasting. This has been Darkness Radio.